Look, if you're going to study xenoarchaeology at the Intersystem Historical Academy, you need to understand something important right up front. Most ancient artifacts are mind-numbingly boring. Oh, sure, the recruitment hollows show you gleaming alien temples and mysterious technology that defies physics. But the reality? The reality is spending 3 hours in Sub-Level 8 staring at a case full of pottery shards while Professor Kilmoth drones on about glaze composition techniques from civilizations nobody's cared about for 6,000 years. Tamsin understood this better than most. She stood near the back of the touring group, arms crossed, trying very hard to look like she was paying attention while actually calculating how many more minutes until she could escape to the cafeteria. Her study partner, Hux, stood beside her, all four of his arms folded in what she'd learned was the Calarian equivalent of, "Please, kill me now." The Vault of Forgotten Things lived up to its name. It was where artifacts went to die, basically. The archaeological equivalent of your grandparents' attic. Too expensive to throw away. Too boring to put on actual display. So down into Sub-Level 8 they went, gathering dust and depressing graduate students. And here, Professor Kilmoth announced, his voice carrying that special kind of pompous certainty that only comes from decades of tenure. We have a crystallized data core from the Relics communion, circa 8,000 BCE by your human calendar. Note the molecular degradation patterns along the— "Do you think anyone's actually listening to him?" Tamsin whispered. Hux's primary eyes swiveled toward her while his secondary pair stayed fixed on the professor. Calarians were excellent at looking attentive while being completely checked out. Two students up front, maybe. The rest of us are dead inside. I was dead inside before we got here. That's the spirit. They moved through the vault in a shuffling herd of academic obligation. Cases lined the walls, each one a tiny monument to civilizations that had risen, built things, felt important, and then vanished into the cosmic woodchipper of time. There were rusted weapons from the Corundai Wars, petrified biological samples from species whose names translated to, basically, the lizard people from that one place, and what appeared to be an ancient musical instrument that looked suspiciously like a torture device. Tamsin had been excited once. Back in her first year, she'd actually believed all the propaganda about unlocking the mysteries of the cosmos and understanding humanity's place among the stars. Now, midway through her third year, she understood that archaeology was mostly about filling out paperwork and arguing over dating methodologies. Still, she showed up. Still, she took notes. Still, she harbored a tiny, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, something interesting would happen. The universe, as it turned out, was listening. They'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when Tamsin noticed something off. The group had paused near a collection of mining equipment from some failed colony operation, and Professor Kilmoth was explaining the economic factors that led to the colony's abandonment in excruciating detail. But Tamsin wasn't looking at the mining equipment. Behind a cracked display case, partially obscured by a support column, something caught the light. It was small, easy to miss, just a glint of dark metal, really. But something about it pulled at her attention like a fishhook in her brain. She drifted away from the group, pretending to examine a nearby exhibit while angling for a better view. The object was a medallion, roughly the size of her palm, made from some kind of unusual dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The surface was covered in intricate geometric patterns, precise and deliberate. At its center was a design that made Tamsin's breath catch in her throat. An 8-pointed compass rose with interlocking triangles. She knew that symbol. She'd known it her entire life. It was her family's crest. the ancient sigil passed down through at least 15 generations. Her grandmother had worn it on a ring she never took off. Her mother kept a wooden carving of it above the fireplace back home. Tamsin herself had it tattooed on her left shoulder blade. Had gotten it the day she turned 18, as a way of carrying her family's history with her to the stars. And here it was, locked in a case in the Academy's forgotten basement, surrounded by debris from dead civilizations. Her hands felt numb. Her heart was doing something complicated and unpleasant in her chest. "Hux," she said, her voice coming out strained. He wandered over, curious. "Found something actually interesting? Because if I have to hear one more word about economic factors, I'm going to—" "Look at that medallion." He looked. His secondary eyes narrowed in that way that meant he was focusing intently. "Okay, pretty design work, little ominous with the dark metal thing, very evil artifact from a cursed tomb, but that's my family crest." Hux blinked, all 4 eyes this time. "What?" "That symbol." The 8-pointed compass rose with the interlocking triangles. "That's my family's sigil. That's the symbol that's been passed down in my bloodline for generations. Tamsin, there are only so many geometric patterns in the universe. Coincidences happen. Convergent design and all that. No." She pulled up her left sleeve, turning to show him her shoulder. The tattoo was there, dark ink against pale skin, identical in every detail to the symbol on the medallion. "That's not convergent design. That's exact." Hux stared at the tattoo, then at the medallion, then back at the tattoo. His primary arms uncrossed slowly. "Okay, that's actually weird." "You think?" Professor Kilmoth's voice drifted over from the main group. "Now, if we move along to the next section, we'll examine some fascinating examples of failed agricultural technology from—" "Professor!" Tamsin called out, her voice louder than she'd intended. "Professor, what is this medallion?" The entire group turned to look at her. Professor Kilmoth's expression suggested he'd just been interrupted mid-sentence by a particularly rude insect. "Miss Tamsin, we are currently discussing—" "I know what we're discussing. I'm asking about this." She pointed at the case. The professor sighed, the kind of deep, put-upon sigh that academics reserve for students who dare to show initiative. He walked over, pulled out his datapad, and scanned the case's information tag. "Ah, yes. That would be artifact designation PX-1138. Recovered from Keteris Prime in the Outer Veil sector approximately 8 years ago. Predecessor civilization, dated at roughly 200,000 years old, give or take a few millennia. Rather unremarkable, actually. The expedition found it in a collapsed structure of unknown purpose. We have dozens of similar items in storage." Tamsin felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. 200,000 years old. Humanity hadn't even existed 200,000 years ago. Not as a civilization, anyway. Humans back then were barely figuring out how to make fire without burning themselves in the process. "Why?" she said carefully. "Does an artifact from 200,000 years ago have my family crest on it?" The vault went very, very quiet. Professor Kilmoth looked at her like she'd just claimed to see faces in her breakfast cereal. "I beg your pardon?" "This symbol." She pointed again, her hand shaking slightly. "This is my family's sigil. It's been in my bloodline for at least 15 generations that we can trace. Why is it on an artifact that predates human civilization?" "Miss Tamsin, I think you're experiencing a bit of pattern recognition bias. The humanoid brain is notorious for seeing familiar shapes in random—" "It's not random!" She yanked her sleeve up again, showed the entire group her tattoo. "Look at it! It's identical! Every line, Every angle, every detail. Hux stepped forward, holding up his datapad with an image of the medallion next to a photo of Tamsin's tattoo. She's right. That's not similar. That's exact, down to the smallest geometric variation. The other students started murmuring. One of them, a Relics with crystalline skin, pulled out their own pad and started taking comparison measurements. Another human student, a guy named Dmitri that Tamsin vaguely knew from practical excavation techniques, moved closer to examine the case. "That's impossible," Dmitri said softly. "That's actually impossible." Professor Kilmoth's face had gone through several interesting color changes. This is clearly some kind of elaborate prank. Or perhaps contamination from a modern reproduction, improperly catalogued. With verified carbon dating that puts it at 200,000 years old? Hux interrupted. That's one impressive prank. I will look into this matter. The professor was flustered now, his academic authority crumbling in the face of something that didn't fit neatly into established theories. For now, we need to continue with our scheduled tour. Miss Tamsin, I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. What's the reasonable explanation for my family symbol being on an artifact from before my family existed? Tamsin shot back. But Professor Kilmoth was already herding the group away, talking loudly about the next exhibit, clearly desperate to regain control of his tour. The other students kept looking back at Tamsin, whispering among themselves. Hux stayed behind with her. That was the academic equivalent of flipping a table. I don't care. Tamsin stared at the medallion, her mind racing through possibilities and coming up empty. Hux, what if there's something about human history that we don't know? Something big? Or what if it's a weird coincidence? You saw it. You said yourself that's not convergent design. I know what I said. He shifted on his feet, uncomfortable. Look, Tamsin, I'm with you. That's bizarre and unsettling and probably important. But what are you going to do about it? March up to the dean and demand answers? She looked at the case, at the medallion, at the symbol that had followed her family through generations, that connected her to ancestors she'd never met, that was apparently older than human civilization itself. Then she looked at the case's locking mechanism. It was old, basic, the kind of thing they used for low-priority artifacts. Tamsin, Hux said warningly, watching her expression. No, I'm just looking. You're not just looking. You're wearing your terrible idea face. I don't have a terrible idea face. You absolutely have a terrible idea face, and it's happening right now. The group had moved around the corner. She could hear Professor Kilmoth's voice echoing from the next section, pontificating about something. The vault's security cameras were visible, but they were old models, the kind with predictable sweep patterns. Hux, go catch up with the group. Absolutely not. Whatever you're about to do, I'm not about to do anything. Just go. Please. If I get in trouble, I don't want you dragged down with me. He stared at her with all four eyes. You're serious about this? That's my family's symbol, Hux, on an artifact from 200,000 years ago. I need to know why. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he sighed, a very human gesture he'd picked up from too much time around Terran students. You're going to get expelled. Probably. And you're doing this anyway. Yes. You're insane. Yes. He shook his head, muttered something in Quillarian that probably translated to a curse, and then turned to go. But he paused at the corner. When you get arrested, don't mention my name. I would never. He disappeared around the corner, and Tamsin was alone with the case and her terrible idea. She waited for the security camera to sweep past, counting seconds in her head. Then she knelt down, pulled a multi-tool from her pocket, and went to work on the case's lock. Look, she wasn't proud of this. Breaking into museum cases was definitely against Academy regulations, probably several laws, and absolutely grounds for expulsion. Her chances at a recommendation letter had just gone from slim to non-existent. But some things mattered more than following rules. Some things, like finding out why your family's ancient symbol was carved into an artifact from the dawn of time, mattered more than your academic career. The lock clicked open. Tamsin reached in, her hand trembling, and lifted the medallion from its display cushion. It was heavier than it looked, and cold. The kind of cold that went beyond temperature into something fundamental. The metal felt wrong against her skin, too smooth, too perfect. When she turned it over, she found more symbols on the back, smaller and more intricate, patterns she didn't recognize. But the main symbol, her family's symbol, was unmistakable. She slipped the medallion into her jacket pocket, closed the case carefully, and stood up just as the security camera began its sweep back. Her heart was hammering. Her hands felt numb. She'd just committed theft, academic dishonesty, and probably several violations of interstellar artifact preservation treaties. But she had the medallion. She had proof. And somewhere, buried in the past of a civilization that vanished 200,000 years ago, there were answers. Tamsin took a breath, pulled her jacket closed, and walked calmly toward the exit, trying very hard to look like someone who hadn't just stolen an irreplaceable historical artifact. Behind her, the empty case sat in the shadows of the vault of forgotten things. Ahead of her, the universe had just gotten a lot more complicated. Tamsin made it back to her dorm without getting arrested, which she considered a minor miracle. The medallion sat heavy in her pocket, a cold weight that seemed to grow heavier with each step. By the time she reached her tiny quarters, shared with a Kendari linguistics student who was mercifully away for the weekend, her hands were shaking. She locked the door, pulled out the medallion, and set it on her desk under the light. It was beautiful, in a deeply unsettling way. The dark metal caught the light strangely, seeming to drink it in rather than reflect it. The geometric patterns were precise beyond anything she'd seen in human metalwork. The lines so perfect they might have been drawn by mathematics itself rather than tools. And there, at the center, was her family's symbol. The 8-pointed compass rose with interlocking triangles that had hung above her childhood fireplace, that her grandmother had worn on her finger until the day she died, that was currently tattooed on Tamsin's own skin. "Okay," she said aloud, because talking to herself helped when the universe stopped making sense. "Okay. Think. There has to be an explanation. Option 1. Convergent design. Different cultures developing similar symbols independently. It happened all the time in archaeology. Spirals, circles, triangles. These were universal shapes that appeared across civilizations that had never contacted each other. But this wasn't just similar. This was identical. Down to the specific angle of each line, the precise spacing of the triangles, the exact number of points on the compass rose. Option 2. Contamination. Maybe someone in her family had been an archaeologist, had seen this artifact, had adopted the symbol. The family history only went back about 500 years in any detail. Maybe the truth was buried somewhere in that gap. Except the artifact was dated at 200,000 years old, and it had been discovered on Kataris Prime, a dead world in the Outer Veil sector, only 8 years ago. No one in her family had been anywhere near that excavation. Option 3. She was losing her mind. That one was looking increasingly plausible. She pulled out her scanner, a handheld unit she'd borrowed from the equipment lab and conveniently forgotten to return. The device hummed to life, bathing the medallion in pale blue light. The readings made her frown. The metal composition came back as unknown. Not unusual or rare, but actually unknown, as in not matching any element or alloy in the scanner's database. The molecular structure was stable but weird, organized in patterns that shouldn't be possible with conventional metallurgy. Age dating confirmed what Professor Kilmoth had said. Roughly 200,000 years, with a margin of error of plus or minus 3,000 years. Which meant this thing was forged when humanity's ancestors were still figuring out that rocks made pretty good tools. Tamsin sat back, rubbing her eyes. She needed more information. She needed context. She needed to talk to someone who might actually have answers, instead of more questions. She needed to call her mother. The quantum comm system in the common room was old and temperamental, with a lag time that made conversations feel like playing verbal ping-pong across the galaxy. But it worked, mostly, and right now Tamsin needed to hear a familiar voice. The connection took 3 tries to establish. When Bronwyn's face finally materialized in the holo display, pixelated and slightly green-tinted from the dodgy signal, Tamsin felt something tight in her chest loosen just a little. "Tamsin, sweetheart, is everything all right? It's the middle of the night here." "Sorry, I lost track of time zones." Tamsin tried to smile, failed. "How are things at home?" Her mother studied her face with that parental ability to detect distress at 100 paces. "Things are fine here. You, however, look like you've seen a ghost. What happened?" "Nothing bad. I mean, nothing dangerous. I have a question about the family crest." Bronwyn's expression shifted to curiosity. "The sigil? What about it? Where does it come from? I mean, I know it's been in the family forever, but do we know its actual origin?" "Well, that's a complicated question." Her mother settled back in her chair, that faraway look coming into her eyes that meant she was accessing the mental database of family history she'd spent decades curating. The documented lineage goes back about 500 years to Ireland and the Scottish Highlands. The symbol appears in family records consistently through that time, always described as an ancestral mark. But before that? Before that, things get murky. There are family stories, of course. Legends about being keepers of old knowledge, protectors of ancient wisdom, that sort of romantic nonsense. Your great-great-grandfather used to claim we were descended from druids, but he also claimed he could predict the weather by the way his knees ached. So take that with a grain of salt. Tamsin touched the medallion in her pocket, feeling its cold weight. "What if it's not nonsense?" "What do you mean?" "What if the family really was keeping something? Some kind of knowledge or connection to something older?" Bronwyn laughed, but it was gentle. "Sweetheart, every family has origin myths. We're not special. We're just people who've been very good at remembering a symbol and passing it down." "Right. Yeah, you're probably right." "Tamsin." Her mother's voice sharpened. "What's going on? You didn't call me in the middle of the night to ask about family history trivia." "I'm fine, really. Just working on a research project and the symbol came up. Got me thinking about roots, you know?" It was a terrible lie, and her mother clearly didn't believe it. But after a few more minutes of gentle probing that Tamsin deflected with increasingly desperate subject changes, Bronwyn let it drop. They said their goodbyes, her mother making her promise to get some sleep and eat a proper meal, and then the connection cut out. Tamsin sat in the empty common room, staring at the dead hollow display. Her mother didn't know anything. The family history was just stories and tradition. Nothing concrete. Nothing that explained why their symbol appeared on an artifact older than civilization. Which meant the answers, if they existed, weren't in her family's past. They were somewhere else. She spent the rest of the night in her dorm, running every test she could think of on the medallion. Spectrographic analysis, density measurements, electromagnetic field mapping. The results were consistent in their strangeness. This object should not exist. The metal was too perfect, the construction too precise, the age too ancient. It was like finding a smartphone buried in a dinosaur fossil layer. The timeline didn't work. The technology didn't work. Nothing worked. By the time morning light started filtering through her window, she'd filled 3 notebooks with data and gotten exactly nowhere. That's when someone knocked on her door. Tamsin froze. For a wild moment, she thought about hiding the medallion, pretending she wasn't home, maybe climbing out the window and fleeing to another star system. But the knock came again, patient and persistent. She opened the door. Dr. Imara stood in the hallway, and she had the medallion's display case information pulled up on her data pad. "Hello, Tamsin. I think we need to have a conversation about your extracurricular activities." Tamsin's academic career flashed before her eyes. Expulsion, criminal charges, being blacklisted from every respectable institution in the intersystem. Her mother's disappointment. Years of work flushed down the recycler. "I can explain," she started. "Good. My office. Now. And bring the artifact you didn't steal." They walked through the Academy's early morning corridors in silence. Dr. Imara was a legend in xenoarchaeological circles, the kind of scholar who'd made discoveries that rewrote textbooks. She was also notoriously strict about academic integrity, and had once expelled 3 students for fabricating excavation data. Tamsin was so dead. Dr. Imara's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 30 years studying dead civilizations. Cramped, chaotic, and filled with artifacts that probably violated several preservation protocols. Books and data pads covered every surface. A genuine Corundai skull sat on the bookshelf, next to what looked suspiciously like an active explosive device from the border world conflicts. The doctor closed the door, gestured for Tamsin to sit, and then placed the medallion on her desk between them. "So," she said, "let's talk about why you committed theft." "I'm sorry. I know it was wrong. I'll accept whatever punishment." "I'm not interested in punishment right now. I'm interested in this." She tapped the medallion. "Professor Kilmoth filed an incident report. Said you claimed this artifact bears your family crest." "It does." "Show me." Tamsin pulled up her sleeve, showing the tattoo. Dr. Imara studied it for a long moment, then pulled up a high-resolution scan of the medallion on her holodisplay. She placed them side by side, zooming in on details, measuring angles. Her expression didn't change, but Tamsin saw her hands tighten on the edge of her desk. "That's not convergent design," the doctor said quietly. "No. That's exact replication." "Yes?" "From an artifact dated at 200,000 years old." "I know." Dr. Imara leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and was silent for so long that Tamsin started to wonder if she'd fallen asleep or possibly died. Then she opened her eyes, and they were alight with something Tamsin had never seen there before: excitement and fear. "Do you know what the predecessor civilization is?" the doctor asked. "Ancient culture, really advanced, vanished mysteriously. We covered it in introductory xenohistory. That's the simple version. The real version is more complicated and infinitely more disturbing. She pulled up a star map, highlighting dozens of systems across the galaxy. The predecessors existed roughly 200,000 years ago. They had technology that makes our current civilization look like children playing with wooden blocks. They could manipulate space-time, engineer planets, possibly even alter the fundamental constants of physics. And then they disappeared. Completely. Overnight, in galactic terms. Every indication suggests they vanished within a single generation. We find their ruins, their artifacts, occasional data fragments, but no bodies, no clear explanation. It's the greatest mystery in xenoarchaeology. What does this have to do with my family crest? Dr. Imara looked at her, and for the first time since Tamsin had known her, the legendary scholar seemed uncertain. What if, she said slowly, humans didn't originate on Earth? The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Tamsin laughed. It came out high and strained. That's ridiculous. We have the entire evolutionary record, fossils, genetic data, the whole history of human development from early primates to 200,000 years ago, when anatomically modern humans suddenly appeared with barely any transitional forms, to the moment when our ancestors made an inexplicable leap in cognitive ability and started creating art, language, complex tools. Dr. Imara's voice was calm but intense. The genetic record shows anomalies, Tamsin, sequences that don't quite fit, dormant DNA that serves no apparent purpose, markers that suggest possible genetic engineering. You're saying humans are predecessors. I'm saying it's a possibility we need to investigate. And your family crest being identical to a predecessor artifact is evidence we can't ignore. Tamsin felt like the floor had turned to water beneath her. This is insane. Yes, but look at the facts. Your symbol, identical match. The timeline, 200,000 years. The genetic anomalies we've documented in human DNA. The sudden appearance of modern human cognition. Dr. Imara leaned forward. What if the predecessors didn't vanish? What if they seeded a primitive world with their genetic material as a survival protocol? What if they factory reset their own species and hid their descendants in plain sight? That's speculation. Wild speculation based on one matching symbol. You're right, which is why we need more data. She stood, pacing her cramped office. I'm assembling a research team. Geneticists, linguists, cultural anthropologists. People I trust who can investigate this quietly. I want you on that team. Me? I'm a third-year student who just committed artifact theft. You're also the living carrier of a predecessor symbol. You're evidence, Tamsin. And more than that, you're someone who cares enough about the truth to risk everything for it. She picked up the medallion, turning it over in her hands. This is bigger than your academic career. This is potentially the most important discovery in human history. The question is, do you want to be part of finding out the truth? Tamsin looked at the medallion, at her tattoo, at the star map showing dead worlds scattered across the galaxy. She thought about her family, generations of people carrying a symbol they didn't understand, keepers of knowledge they'd forgotten. She thought about humanity, young and scrappy and convinced they were newcomers to the galactic stage, unaware they might be inheritors of its greatest civilization. Yes, she said, I want to know the truth. Dr. Imara smiled, and it was fierce. Good, because I have a feeling the truth is going to be terrifying. She pulled up a contact list on her holo display, names and credentials scrolling past. Let's find out what your family has been keeping secret for 200,000 years. The restricted research lab on Level 3 looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream workspace, which, Tamsin supposed, was exactly what it had become. Hollow displays covered every wall, showing genetic sequences, linguistic patterns, star maps, and images of artifacts from a dozen predecessor sites. Data streams cascaded through the air in columns of light, and the whole place hummed with the kind of manic energy that comes from people who've stumbled onto something that shouldn't exist. Dr. Imara had assembled her team fast. Apparently, when you're a legendary scholar investigating the possible origin of humanity itself, people clear their schedules. Cole was a Dorvian geneticist who looked like he'd been carved from granite and had the personality to match. He stood at the primary display, manipulating genetic sequences with sharp, irritated gestures, muttering to himself in a language that sounded like gravel in a blender. "This is impossible," he announced for the 5th time that morning. "Genetically impossible." "And yet," Dr. Imara said calmly from her workstation, "and yet, here we are, staring at human DNA that contains sequences we cannot explain." He pulled up a strand, highlighting sections in red. "These dormant genes, what you humans call junk DNA. They are not junk. They are instructions, but instructions for biological processes that modern humans do not possess." Tamsin leaned forward, trying to follow. "What kind of processes?" "Advanced neural connectivity, enhanced regeneration capabilities, resistance to radiation. These are traits we find in predecessor biological samples, what little we have recovered." He zoomed in further, his expression somewhere between fascination and horror. "Your species has been carrying predecessor genetics for 200,000 years, dormant but intact." Hux, who'd been brought onto the team because Tamsin had refused to do this without him, whistled low. "So humans are walking fossil records." "More than that." Cole pulled up comparison charts, genetic markers from predecessor sites next to human samples. "The correlation is too strong for coincidence. Someone engineered this. Someone took predecessor genetic material and seeded it into a primitive hominid population on Earth." "Factory reset," Tamsin said quietly, remembering Dr. Imara's words. "They reset their own species." "That is the hypothesis, yes." Leith, the Kandari linguist, spoke up from their corner workstation. Their voice was soft, always soft, but right now it carried weight. "The genetic evidence supports linguistic findings. I have been analyzing Proto-Indo-European, Sumerian, Ancient Chinese, all the root languages of Earth. They contain grammatical structures that should not exist." They pulled up linguistic maps, syntax patterns flowing across the display like rivers. "Language evolves organically, follows predictable patterns, but Earth's ancient languages contain embedded structures that match predecessor linguistic frameworks. Not borrowed, not influenced. Embedded, as if they were always there, waiting to emerge." "You're saying language itself is inherited?" Hux asked. "I am saying that whoever seeded Earth with predecessor genetics also seeded cognitive frameworks. The capacity for complex language, abstract thought, symbolic reasoning. These did not evolve naturally. They were programmed." The room went quiet except for the hum of equipment. Tamsin looked at the medallion, now sitting in the analysis field at the center of the lab. It rotated slowly, throwing geometric shadows across the walls. "So, what is this thing?" she asked. "What's the medallion for?" Dr. Imara joined her, studying the artifact. "We believe it is a marker, an identifier. The symbols on predecessor artifacts are not decorative, they are functional. Navigation markers, family designations, possibly even genetic keys. My family has been carrying a genetic key for 200,000 years, and nobody noticed?" Your family is not alone. The doctor pulled up a new display, and Tamsin's breath caught. Dozens of symbols filled the screen, each one tagged with a human cultural origin. Celtic knots, Japanese Mon crests, Sanskrit characters, Nordic runes, African tribal marks. We have been cross-referencing human cultural symbols with predecessor artifacts. The matches are everywhere. Families across Earth, across every culture, carrying symbols that predate human civilization. The Nakamura family crest appears on a predecessor data core from the Belian cluster, Leith added. The Celtic Trinity knot matches architectural elements from 3 separate predecessor sites. The list continues. Dozens of matches, possibly hundreds. Cole pulled up a galactic map, highlighting planets in red. If this hypothesis is correct, if humans are predecessors who underwent genetic reset, then modern humanity has legal claim to every predecessor site in known space. Do you understand what that means? War, Hux said flatly. That means war. At minimum, massive political upheaval. Dr. Imara's expression was grim. Current galactic law treats humanity as a young species, granted minimal territorial rights, restricted technology access, limited representation. Every major power, the Quillarian Compact, the Ixan hegemony, the Dorvian Federation, they have built their territories on predecessor ruins. And if humans are actually predecessors, Tamsin said slowly, understanding dawning, then those territories belong to us. Legally, yes. Practically, it would destabilize the entire galactic political structure. The doctor sat down heavily. This is why we are researching quietly. We need absolute proof before this goes public. Evidence so overwhelming that nobody can deny or suppress it. Which brings us to our next problem. Cole manipulated the map, zooming in on a single system in the outer veil. Kataris Prime, where the medallion was found. The original excavation was superficial, barely scratched the surface. If there is proof, definitive proof, it will be there. You want to mount an expedition, Tamsin said. We need to mount an expedition. The medallion is extraordinary evidence, but it is one artifact. We need context, additional samples, documentation. We need to go to the source. Dr. Imara stood, her decision made. I will petition the Academy for an emergency research expedition. We will frame it as routine archaeological survey work. Nothing more. Kataris Prime is in neutral space, so we will not need to navigate territorial complications. How long? Tamsin asked. 2 weeks to secure authorization and assemble equipment, then 3 weeks travel time to the outer veil. The doctor looked at each of them in turn. This will be dangerous, not physically, perhaps, but in every other way. If we find what I think we will find, if we prove this hypothesis, we will change everything. Galactic politics, human identity, the entire historical narrative of known space. People have started wars over less. I'm in, Tamsin said immediately. Hux sighed. Of course you are. Fine, I'm in too. Someone needs to keep you from getting killed. Cole nodded. The genetic samples alone would be worth the risk. Leith's voice was quiet but certain. I will come. If there are linguistic records, I must see them. Dr. Imara smiled, and it was fierce and proud. Then we have a team. Let's go find out what really happened 200,000 years ago. She pulled up an image of Kataris Prime, a dead world circling a dying star. Its surface was scarred and lifeless, atmosphere barely breathable, nothing but ruins and dust. Somewhere down there, she said, is the truth about humanity, about what you were, what you became, and what you might be again. Tamsin touched her tattoo through her shirt, feeling the raised lines of ink that matched the symbol on the medallion, the symbol that had traveled through time and space and 200,000 years of forgetting. "Then let's go find it," she said. The medallion continued its slow rotation in the analysis field, casting shadows that looked like compass roses pointing toward home, toward answers, toward a past that refused to stay buried. Behind them, the displays continued their cascade of data, building a case that would either rewrite history or get them all killed. Possibly both. The ship was called Boundless Inquiry, which Tamsin thought was either perfectly appropriate or deeply ironic, given that they were about to bound into some very uncomfortable inquiries indeed. It was a mid-sized research vessel designed for extended expeditions to places where the coffee was bad and the accommodations worse. Kataris Prime looked exactly like a planet that had given up on life. Through the viewport, it hung against the void like a bruise, atmosphere thin and poisonous, surface scoured by time and whatever catastrophe had killed the predecessor civilization. The sun it orbited was dying, casting everything in sickly amber light. "Cheerful place," Hux muttered. "Really screams, 'Come uncover ancient mysteries.'" They landed near the original excavation site, coordinates pulled from Academy records. The structure was partially collapsed, half buried in dust, that might have once been cities or forests or anything at all before 200,000 years turned it to powder. Tamsin stood at the entrance, medallion in hand. The symbol seemed to pulse in the dim light, or maybe that was her imagination running wild. "The original team only went down 2 levels, Dr. Imara said, consulting her data pad. "They catalogued what they could reach and moved on. Standard practice for low-priority sites." "Low priority," Cole said with disgust. "They were standing on the key to human origins and called it low priority." "To be fair," Leith said softly, "they had no reason to think otherwise. The descent was slow, careful, documentation at every step. The walls were covered in symbols, worn but still visible. Tamsin recognized 3 more human cultural marks in the first 100 meters. A spiral that matched ancient Celtic art. A geometric pattern identical to traditional Navajo weaving. Something that looked suspiciously like the foundation of Sanskrit characters. "It's everywhere," she whispered. "The whole place is covered in human symbols." "Predecessor symbols," Dr. Imara corrected gently. "That humans inherited." They went deeper, past the levels the original expedition had reached, into chambers that hadn't been disturbed in 200,000 years. The air was stale, barely breathable even with filters. Dust hung in the beams of their lights like ghosts. And then they found the vault. It was vast, circular, the walls covered floor to ceiling in symbols. Every human culture Tamsin had ever studied was represented. Japanese, Maori, Aztec, Norse, dozens she didn't recognize. They spiraled inward toward the center of the chamber, where something waited. A data core, crystalline and ancient, still faintly glowing with power that should have died before humans learned to speak. "That's impossible," Cole breathed. "Power sources do not last 200,000 years." "Predecessor technology," Dr. Imara said. "We still don't understand most of it." Leith moved forward slowly, hands trembling. "If this is what I think it is, if this is an archive—" Tamsin approached the core, medallion held tight. As she got closer, the core's light pulsed brighter, responding to something. The medallion, she realized. It was responding to the medallion. "Tamsin, wait," Dr. Imara started, but Tamsin was already pressing the medallion to the core's surface. The vault erupted in light. A holographic display materialized, massive and overwhelming. No image, but sound. a voice speaking in a language that was almost familiar, like hearing your own voice from underwater. Leith stepped forward, hands flying across their translation pad, tears streaming down their face. I can translate. The grammar. It matches. I can translate. The voice continued, patient and sad, and unbearably ancient. What is it saying? Tamsin demanded. Leith's voice shook as they read the translation appearing on their screen. To those who carry our names, our symbols, our blood. We are the last. The great unraveling has come. We cannot stop it. The holographic display shifted, showing images now. Cities falling, stars dying, a civilization watching itself end. We have hidden you in the cradle of Earth. In 200,000 cycles, you will have forgotten us. You will believe yourselves young, new, small. This is not failure. This is hope. Tamsin felt tears on her own face, hot and unexpected. We are sending you back to the beginning. To primitive forms, simple lives, clean slate. You will grow again, slowly this time, naturally. You will rediscover fire, tools, language, the stars. You will build yourselves back up from nothing. The images shifted to Earth, primitive and beautiful, humanity in its infancy learning to survive. When you find this message, you will know the truth. You are never alone. You are never small. You are us. You are the predecessors. And now, you will decide what comes next. The voice paused, and in that silence hung 200,000 years of waiting. We leave you our legacy, not our technology, not our mistakes, but our potential. Be better than we were. Survive what we could not. And remember, when you reach the stars again, you are coming home. The hologram faded. The vault fell silent, except for breathing and quiet, crying. They stood there, humanity's representatives, learning they were the punchline to a cosmic joke 200,000 years in the making. They hadn't discovered an ancient civilization. They'd discovered themselves. So, Hux finally said, voice rough, what now? Dr. Imara wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, became again the scholar who'd spent her life seeking truth. Now we document everything, record it all, and then we go home, and we publish. This will start wars, Cole said. Probably, but the truth can't stay buried. She looked at Tamsin. Your family kept this symbol alive for 200,000 years without knowing why. Thousands of families did. They were waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to ask the right questions and refuse to accept easy answers. Tamsin looked at the medallion, at the vault, at the symbols spiraling across walls that her ancestors had carved before forgetting they were her ancestors. We're not a young species, she said, testing the words. We're the oldest one in the galaxy. Your inheritors, Leith corrected gently, of the greatest civilization known space has ever produced. The journey back to Luminara's crown took 3 weeks. They spent it compiling evidence, building an argument so overwhelming that even the most skeptical academic couldn't deny it. Genetic data, linguistic analysis, the recording from Kataris Prime, everything. Tamsin stood in the observation deck the night before they arrived home, watching stars stream past. Hux joined her. Comfortable silence between friends who'd just discovered their place in the universe was significantly different than they'd thought. You know what's funny? She said. I came to the academy thinking I'd study dead civilizations. Turns out I am one. Hux laughed, that clicking Quillarian laugh she'd learned to love. So what do you do now? You're about to tell humanity they're secretly ancient alien gods. Not gods, just survivors. She touched her tattoo through her shirt. We survived 200,000 years of forgetting. I think we can survive remembering. The boundless inquiry jumped to hyperspace, carrying truth that would shatter comfortable lies and rebuild the galaxy's understanding of itself. Behind them, Kataris Prime orbited its dying sun, keeping its vigil, its message finally delivered. Ahead, humanity waited to learn they'd been coming home all along.